So, I know that making this video will probably be channel suicide because I guess I'm going against Goliath here, but over the past few months I've gleaned information from people leaving comments and links to websites on my channel that I've always been quick to delete because at first I didn't really want to believe them, but the more I've looked at them and the more evidence that's popped up, I guess the angrier and more disappointed I've become, and it's kind of culminated in this, I guess. So I know this is going to cause a hell of a shitstorm, and that's unfortunate, but I think some things need to be said. So I guess buckle up. This is just the beginning of what's to follow, I'm sure. So this is my honest critique of the Naturally Enhanced program by AlphaDestiny. Starts off describing how the program is really for attaining a certain look and not necessarily maximizing strength, which I think is, it's whatever. It's just a type of bodybuilding, I guess you could call it. He makes a big point, though, about the way to get big is to increase your strength. So in a way, it is a strength program, even though the focus is on a certain aesthetic. Not aesthetics, but an aesthetic. Goes on to say that about 90% of everything you've ever read fitness-related is a lie, which is probably true. I, for the most part, agree with that. So I'm going to read this next sentence word for word just to kind of get the gist of this. He says, you'll have morons talking about sarcoplasmic versus myofibular hypertrophy, gradual progressive overload, the best rep range, best tempo, best exercise for a given muscle, best diet, best whatever the fuck they can come up with. The truth, here's the sentence. The truth is that most of these guys just invent shit. None of them have read any books on human physiology, physics, exercise science, nutritional science, etc. Instead, they go on internet forums and discuss ridiculous theories with their uneducated peers. In turn, the advice that you receive from these people is known as bro science, a term that has become increasingly more popular in the online fitness community. And now, the thing is, something's been brought to me is that Alex from AlphaDestiny doesn't have any sort of certifications or degrees or anything other than what he's learned that he's taught himself, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black when you're not, actually educated and you're making fun of other uneducated people. But anyway, onward. He makes reference to his theories and what he puts into the program being scientifically, proven everything, and talks about how over 200 qualified experts in the field, most of whom are doctors, agree with him, but doesn't actually cite any doctors, at least at this point. He may further on, but I get the feeling that these 200 doctors are just kind of... the next part he kind of goes on, he's talking about how the biggest driver of size in natural lifters is gaining strength, which I tend to agree with for the most part. Getting stronger typically will get you larger, but they don't always go hand in hand. Especially the type of training I do, Bulgarian style training, I'll typically put on 100 pounds on the lift sometimes in a week, but I'm not necessarily getting size from that. So in some ways it's very true, but also it's not the end all be all of driving size in your body. But anyway, this point I actually quite like. He says, the day you become huge is when you will be strong in many different exercises and in several different rep ranges, which I agree. I preach building a base first if you're a beginner, and he honestly is, to some extent, talking about the same thing, is getting good at multiple lifts, different rep ranges, not just getting good at doing 3 sets of 5, for example. So I quite like that. The next part, which I think is good and honest of the program, he says it's highly specific towards developing that naturally enhanced appearance, which is what he calls the aesthetic he's shooting for, which involves large traps, shoulders, forearms. He says it's not for competitive athletes or fitness models, so it's good, honest, thing to say about his own program, which is good. The next part is dissing split routines, which obviously he's going to do because it's a full body training program. It's twice a week in the gym, twice a week at home, and I'm not going to go into super detail in the program because you have to buy it to get it, so I'm not just going to unveil everything in the program, but there's a intensity day and a volume day, which I'll get into later. But you're in the gym twice and then doing some mini workouts at home by yourself. So of course he's going to, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to bash split routines, even though in my opinion split routines can be very useful. There are different kinds of splits. He kind of mostly just refers to like typical bro splits, which would be like one body part a day. But with my own training and other people I've trained, that can be effective. I don't think it's the most effective by any means, but just to kind of outright dismiss splits, push-pull legs, anything like that is a little bit silly. But obviously, like I said, his program is full body, so it makes sense to kind of bash the competition. One of the reasons he says bro splits work for people who are taking steroids is that their protein synthesis will last up to a week instead of the typical 48 hours of a natural lifter. But he's kind of using steroids as a broad term. Typically, protein synthesis is going to be affected by many things for people on performance-enhancing drugs. Often the protein synthesis itself is going to be because of insulin use, for example, and the kind of combination of everything that goes along with that, growth hormone, the actual anabolics themselves. But he's kind of using that as a broad term to say that you can only have protein synthesis, Jesus, for 48 hours as a natural lifter. So bro splits couldn't possibly work, is what he's saying, which is, it's a half-truth, I guess. He then goes on to talk about concurrent periodization and how it's very important for people who are switching exercises often. To a point, I agree with this. Hitting different exercises can stimulate new growth, avoid hitting plateaus, but he recommends basically never switching or keeping one exercise for more than 3 weeks, which is, especially for beginners, I would typically preach having some base exercises that people focus on. For example, a conventional deadlift, a back squat, and overhead press, for example. Really focus on getting good at those. And what I usually have beginners do personally is rotate accessory exercises every 3 to 5 weeks. Then you can kind of get different movement patterns worked in and build a base that way. But you should still be getting good at a few key exercises, especially as a beginner. It's very important that you get good at, for example, again, a conventional deadlift. You should be able to do a decent amount and not just go from conventional to hack to Jefferson to whatever variation every couple weeks. You're not going to get strong that way as a beginner. And this is kind of taken from Louis Simmons and the West Side Barbell Method, where they're rotating exercises pretty much weekly, but that's totally different, and I would not recommend that for beginners at all. Hitting a board press and then a bottoms up press and then a slingshot press, it's just not gonna do much for beginners. It's gonna be too much. You're not gonna be good enough at lifting, for one thing, to actually get a lot out of it, and yeah, it really takes years to get to that point where that's gonna be effective. But again, something I disagree with, but onward and upward, I guess. This is also kind of bad advice to be given to beginners, to say to rotate exercises frequently, just because it's a good way to prevent plateaus. But part of the reason you're not going to plateau is because you're not really getting stronger, or not going to actually know if you're getting stronger or not. And beginners really need to learn, what pushing is. When things get grindy, they need to learn how to feel that. But if you're just rotating exercises every damn week, you're not going to ever learn how to address your issues, your weaknesses, and things like that, which is a big downfall of this program, in my opinion, because if you're rotating all the time, you'll never know, hey, my bench sucks because my triceps are weak. But if you never actually do it often enough, you're not going to know that. So here's a part I like quite a bit. It says you must intelligently select exercises based off of your own individual weaknesses. But this kind of comes back to having a super high exercise selection for beginners. They're never going to learn their weaknesses because they're rotating too often. But that sentence itself, I do quite like. And yeah. So now we're on to the program itself. For the intensity day, I guess, again, I'm not going to go into super detail because this is a paid for program and I don't just want to, unveil everything in it. But he recommends 10 exercises on the intensity day. These are very heavy reps, and these are done with maximum intensity, basically. Starts off with a couple presses, and then some upper body isolation, a deadlift for a squat, and then back and forearms, basically. But again, there's a certain order to it. Yeah. 10 exercises in a day is a lot. That's a lot of exercises, especially many of them are compounds. And then what's going to happen is your first couple exercises are going to go great, and then you're just going to be fatigued and physically and mentally. By the time you get to those 8th, 9th, 10th exercises, it's just not going to be doing much. This is kind of the problem with a 2 times a week program. It's just you have to shove in so many exercises, especially there's multiple sets per exercise, which is what is recommended. It's going to take a long ass time. It's probably 4 hours in the gym, honestly, unless you're doing really short rest periods, like 30 seconds, but that's not going to be great for progression and building work capacity maybe, but it's a lot of exercise, especially if you're going really heavy. That's going to take time. You can't just rest 30 seconds if you're maxing out your overhead press and stuff, but I'll get more onto that later. And then there's the second day of the week in the gym, which is the volume day, and for that there's 13 recommended exercises, which is, again, and assuming you're doing more reps and more sets for all these exercises, that's going to take, I can't imagine how long that would take you. Again, same setup pretty much, some upper body pressing, some upper body isolation, and then a lower body lift and some back isolation and forearms and stuff. So pretty much the same setup, just more of each, and again, I'll go into more of this later. I will say that you are pretty much hitting most of your body, if not all of your body, in these programs, so that's one positive, I suppose, is that you are hitting pretty much every part of your body to some extent. So he begins discussing the volume day a bit, and he's saying there's between 3 and 6 sets per exercise of between 8 and up to 100 reps in each set. So again, that volume day is going to take, I can't imagine how long that would take. Even if you're only doing 3 sets of 8 for all 13 exercises, that's going to take a long ass time unless you're really cooking and using such light weights that you're probably not going to be stimulating much. But I mean, if you have 4 hours to spend in the gym, certainly possible, but the average person, in my opinion, doesn't have that much time. That's going to be a huge drawback for this type of training. For the intensity day, he has between 1 and 5 sets of between 1 and 8 reps for each set. So it won't be too bad, but again, getting through 10 exercises is going to take some time again. So again, several hours at least, but it's probably not going to take quite as long, but you're probably going to be resting longer because the weight's going to be so much higher, and you can't just go boom, boom, boom when you're lifting at 90% plus of your maximum. He explains how hitting both heavy weights and high rep sets are good for driving hypertrophy, and he doesn't really say building a base, but that's basically what he's talking about, which I agree with. Getting good at different rep ranges is a positive, especially for beginners. So I do agree with that. It says most people burn out on other types of program because volume intensity is not managed in a proper way. And if it's a good program, they will be managed properly, whether it's through deloads, rotating exercises, rotating rep ranges, whatever it happens to be. Good programs will have a way of managing fatigue. So that's kind of not really a truth. There are plenty of bad programs that don't manage fatigue well, so that's certainly true. But I'd say good programs, have some sort of way of managing fatigue. So goes on to talk about the mini workouts, which are also twice a week, and he makes some pretty bold claims saying that by doing these, you'll build soft tissue, about joint ligaments and tendons, and you will never suffer from non-muscular pain, which is a bold claim, saying you'll have bulletproof elbows, knees, shoulders, lower backs, etc. And I would personally not ever guarantee that to someone. There's certain ways to improve that, but to say that you'll never have joint pain or anything like that's kind of dishonest in my opinion. So basically these workouts are some active recovery, working your neck, doing some band work, some isolation stuff with bands, just getting the blood flowing, which I think is honestly a really good idea, and that's what I have a lot of my clients doing in their home, just doing some basic mobility stuff, some stuff just to get the blood flowing. It often eases soreness and aids in recovery. So I agree with these. I actually like these mini home workouts. I'm not a huge proponent of direct neck training. For some people, definitely, if you're a boxer, it can help with avoiding concussions, etc. But again, this is an aesthetics program, so it makes sense that he's trying to train the neck because that's one of his things. So that's totally fine because that's part of the idea behind it. So yeah, actually, I quite like these. Saying 20 to 30 minutes at most. Quite like that. He does seem to kind of overstate the effectiveness of these active recovery workouts, saying, it'll completely eliminate soreness and such, but his, ideas behind it are sound. But yeah, you can't really say it'll, it's not night and day necessarily doing these active recovery stuff. It's certainly a, boost, but it's not, you go from, being super fatigued and sore to feeling like Arnold Schwarzenegger the next day. So it's kind of overstating how important they are, or not how important, but how effective they are, I should say. Next up, he goes on to talk about sets and reps, self-asking himself, I guess, rhetorical question, what's the best set rep range? And then he doesn't really give any suggestions other than whatever gets you, your strength up is what's most effective. And that's probably true, but he doesn't really give any recommendations for sets or reps. He kind of talked about it earlier a little bit, but there's no real recommendations in this section. All it says basically is whatever gets you strongest. So for beginners, that's not exactly the best advice. Having some sort of guideline is usually advisable. Say 5 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 8 or whatever it happens to be. So kind of not really wrong, but just kind of not the best thing to tell beginners, honestly. He kind of segues into talking about sarcoplasmic versus myofibrillar. I can't talk today. Hypertrophy. The next session, and he actually cites a source here from PubMed, saying basically whatever rep range you're doing doesn't really make much of a difference for that topic. He's saying you can still get big doing low reps, and you can still get strong doing high rep sets. So, which I totally agree with. But to say that they're necessarily the same thing isn't the best idea. So we'll see if later on he talks about if you're trying to optimize certain performances, what rep ranges you should be working in. But for now, he's just kind of saying it doesn't really matter what you're doing, which is not quite accurate, not false, but not really true either. So we'll see. Okay, I spoke too soon. He does talk about adjusting your training sets and reps based on what your training goals are. So again, working on strength, hitting higher percentages of your 1 rep max, and if you're more working on typically trying to, he says that if you want to accumulate large amounts of metabolic fatigue, you should be doing higher rep sets. So it's true if you want to be getting strength, you got to be, if your goal is strength, you need to be lifting heavy. And then he talks about, kind of goes in, I can't pronounce the guy's name, Prilipin's chart, which is kind of known, talking about how many sets and reps you should be optimally hitting while doing certain percentages, like total reps, I should say, over how many sets. So just kind of describes that, which is not his work, but I think it's good he's touching on that. And he also talks about how there's some issues with that chart, which I agree with. But yeah, he basically says use that chart for the intensity days, but don't use it for the volume days. For the volume days, you should always be going balls to the wall. It's a direct quote. Basically, because there's only one, you're only doing it once a week, and you should just go ham bone on it, I guess. So go from there. So the warm up, he suggests that the best way to warm up is to do the movement itself that you're planning on training. For example, if you're squatting, just doing some sets working up to your main sets, which to a point I agree, and I always do that with exercises, my clients and myself, starting with low weights like just the bar, and then kind of slowly working your way up until you get your working sets. Pretty normal practice, but he's saying don't basically do any stretching or mobility work before that. And a lot of beginners have really shitty mobility, typically in their hips, hip flexors or glutes are tight, hamstrings are tight, shoulder and chest issues. So I'm not saying you should be spending a shit ton of time doing that before your workouts for beginners, but you need to be able to hit certain positions. So if some light stretching gets you able to hit a squat below parallel, you should definitely be doing that. You shouldn't just be hopping into it and hoping everything goes well, because it's not going to for beginners. It's typically some light mobility work, some active mobility typically, is what you want to be doing. He does talk about static stretching is not the best and can lead to increased injury rates, which to an extent is true. But again, if you're not able to hit certain positions, that's when you're going to be getting hurt. So just for beginners, only just jumping into stuff, that's not the best. Typically, with my beginners, I have them doing just some bodyweight squats, getting the blood flowing, maybe walking on a treadmill a little bit. They should be warm and sweating a little bit before they just hop into something, especially something like a squat or a deadlift. And even though his program starts with presses each day, which will get you warm to an extent, it's not getting your lower body warm in the right manner, and it's not activating muscles. A lot of people have muscle activation issues when they first start out, and that can be a easy way to ease beginners into squatting and stuff, kind of teach them how to use their glutes. And again, these shouldn't be things you're doing a shit ton of. Your warm-up shouldn't take an hour of like foam rolling and activation drills and stuff, but some quick activation drills and some light mobility work is honestly probably the best thing beginners can be doing. And even more advanced people, there's nothing wrong with like just, doing some light hamstring stretching for a couple minutes before you deadlift. A lot of people will notice improved performance just because they're more comfortable hitting positions easier, and etc. etc. So this next part kind of contradicts what we said earlier about rotating exercises pretty much between 1 to 3 weeks, but in this part he's saying rotate exercises once you fail to make progress in a given exercise. That's a little different. It's more similar to the way I normally train, which is like Bulgarian Light / Wisconsin method. Again, for beginners, not necessarily the best advice because you're never going to learn how to burst past plateaus and address your own weaknesses or address why you're plateauing. For more advanced people, I think that can be useful. Like I said, that's what I do more or less, but it's not the best thing to say to beginners. Again, these aren't bad. I feel like a lot of the stuff I'm reading, it's not bad advice. It's just not. It doesn't pertain well to beginners, which is what this program is designed for. So that's my major issue with a lot of what I've been reading so far. And then like right away in the next thing, he says, recognize you'll only be able to use the same exercises for 1 to 3 weeks maximum. Again, this is kind of contradictory again. How would you know if you stalled after only 1 week of doing something? So this is kind of going with Westside again and rotating exercise often, and he's saying exercise rotation's a necessity, but it's not always. There's plenty of people who have, when they've been benching every week for 30 years and they're still progressing. Maybe not 30 years, but 20 years. And it's just, again, if you're only working on something for 3 weeks as a beginner, you're not going to get good at anything. There is certainly a skill component to lifting, which is why a lot of my clients, I have a hierarchy of movements I teach them, which I have a video about, which you can look at, but getting good at one exercise before moving on to another one. So, for example, I make sure someone's good at a goblet squat before they front squat, and then make sure they're good at front squatting and move well before they start back squatting. So I wouldn't have them go from goblet to front squat to back squat to Zercher to SSB to blah, 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 week after week, because they're not going to get good at any of them because they're all slightly different. And especially from a non-athletic background, which the average person in the gym is, because most people are not athletes, you're not going to ever develop the skill component to lifting, which is a big part of it, and the consistency is key there, and doing things repeatedly and often. Just, that's not a good advice for beginners in my opinion, just rotating super often. So again, when I said earlier, I often rotate people's accessory work because again, they can try out new things, makes it a little more interesting and more fun, but main movements should really stay the same as for beginners for quite a long time. So that's my opinion. This next part's a little silly in my opinion. He says that basically the tempo you're doing exercises doesn't matter at all, and that's simply not true. He's saying all that matters is the sets times the reps times the weight, and especially for beginners, there should be some kind of tempo involved. It doesn't have to be super complex, but again, building that skill component, learning control over the movement, not just busting through things as fast as possible, which is what he's advocating for the most part. It's not a good, and I think it's kind of a misunderstanding of the dynamic effort day that Westside Barbell employs, where often they're doing the eccentric and the concentric as quickly as possible. But that's totally different, and again, it's not necessary for beginners. Just going willy-nilly and busting through 3 sets of 10 of something is not the same as doing them properly with control and a slight tempo to them. Being explosive in the concentric, great. But you need, as a beginner, to learn that control, and a good place to learn that control is the eccentric, because you are stronger in the eccentric. And he's saying that causes, going slow in a lift will cause tendon damage and other issues, but I disagree. I think it does basically the opposite. It's going to help build that tissue. Kind of disregards time under tension, which to some extent is true. It's not the end-all be-all of things, but again, for building tendon strength and learning the movements, time under tension can help a lot. So he kind of goes to say that eccentric strength is not related to concentric strength necessarily, and by building eccentric strength, your concentric won't go up, but that's simply not true. Doing some overload sets with just eccentrics or assisted reps can certainly be used to build concentric strength. So that's just a falsehood, really. And he kind of goes on to use overspeed eccentrics, as coined by Louis Simmons, to explain why you should be going quickly on the eccentric and the concentric, and that's not some beginners should not be doing speed reps like that. Not a good idea. And he kind of goes to talk about physics and some of its sketchy physics. So again, this is a program for beginners, so these aren't necessarily bad principles. Doing speed reps can be useful, but not for someone who's never stepped foot in the gym before and doesn't know what the hell they're doing. That's awful advice to be giving someone. He says, if you are strong, you will be jacked. Tempo is irrelevant. That's clearly not true. There's plenty of tiny people who are very strong. Look at Johnny Candido. He is an extremely strong individual, and he's not what I consider super jacked. So it's a false equivalency, I guess. This part's actually kind of funny, and I like this. He says, you gotta talk about body fat percentages, and the optimals in this program is, between 15 and 20%, because it's a certain aesthetic they're going for, but or he's going for. But he says, here we go. You shouldn't have any issues attracting women unless your character is really cringeworthy, in which not even leanness would fix that. And that's pretty true and pretty funny, actually. I like that. The next part here I'm not really qualified to talk about, but it's talking about how to appear lean and look bigger while in clothes. He's talking about certain hairstyles and whatnot, using certain types of clothing, and again working on those certain exercises that he believes are important. I'm not really qualified to talk about that, but it's kind of weird for a fitness manual, but again, this is an aesthetics thing. And yeah, quick one about the hair. He's saying that you should shave your stomach hair to make it appear like you have visible six-pack abs. It's pretty obvious if you've shaved in a six-pack that it's not an actual six-pack, but I don't know. That's, again, not really qualified to talk about fashion stuff. So he does recommend a little bit of low-intensity cardio. He says not to do jogging because it's heavy. For heavier individuals, be rough on the joints, which is fine. Recommend some other things like walking on an incline on a treadmill, swimming stuff, but running in the gym for like a long ass time with this program. Again, it's only twice a week, so I guess you can do this on your off days. It doesn't really say as far as I can tell so far, but it's a lot of time in this program. Honestly, I can't see a beginner going 4 hours and then going for a 10-minute swim afterwards. I don't think you'd A, have the energy, and B, not have the willpower to do that. But at least he's recommending doing a little bit, so that's not a bad thing, especially for beginners. Help build work capacity, help with recovery and whatnot. And then going on to talk about medium to high intensity cardio, he kind of says he can only recommend GPP work, which is kind of a misunderstanding of the term. GPP can mean a lot of things to different people. For example, a football player, an American football player, GPP might be squatting and bench press. So just saying GPP doesn't mean a whole lot. It's typically a lot of people who kind of misunderstand the term use it to refer to doing like functional movements, like sled work, which is what he talks about. You're doing sled work, stuff like that. Some, farmers walks, stuff like that, which is what he's using it as. So GPP can really depends on the context. He's saying it's function movements like walking with a yoke, farmers walks, wheelbarrow walks, stuff like that. It says not to do high intensity interval training. But yeah, it's just kind of a misuse of the term a little bit, but or not a misuse, but a misunderstanding of the term. Not really a big deal because he kind of clarifies it as he goes, but it just kind of bugs me a little bit. Talking about the frequency of the cardio or conditioning work you'd be doing, said it all depends on individual and recovery abilities. You'll find what works best for you over time. But for beginners, especially again non-athletic beginners, just trying to listen to your body isn't good advice because most people are really bad at listening to their body. It's they don't have enough experience moving really to know if it's affecting their recovery or not. So just saying do what works best for you is not good advice for beginners. Something a little more concrete is something I'd like to see in this, but so I was saying you can throw it in either on different times or at the end of your workouts on the workout days, or doing them if you're new to it, adding it on your home workout days, which is, again, if you're in the gym, if you're doing a workout on your gym days, you're gonna be there for like 5 hours and you're doing some cardio afterwards too. It's just not like a realistic program. It sounds great in theory, like, oh, get this all done in one day and you're good and you can have the rest of the week, but it's just not you're not gonna be able to put in the right amount of effort to see any progress, honestly. His recovery advice is pretty sound. Talks about contrast showers, and even though there isn't a whole lot of science behind contrast showers being effective, I do them from time to time. I recommend some people do them from time to time. They at least have a placebo effect to make you feel a little better for a short amount of time, which can help, at least mentally, in your recovery. Talks about sleeping a lot, blah, blah. So pretty normal recovery advice. Nothing really out of the usual there, and it's pretty sound advice. So this part is kind of talking about the sets and rep schemes and stuff and what weights you should be hitting. Talks about 8 different kinds of methods for lifting heavy, more or less, which is the max effort method, repetition method, time method, dynamic effort method, drop sets, accommodating drop sets, back off sets, and rest pause. And he kind of describes them in detail and then says how they should be modified for his style of training. It's a lot for beginners. Beginners don't need to be doing most of this shit. Just get good at a few movements, rotate your accessories from time to time, get good at your accessories, get good at moving properly, improving mobility. This is going to do for beginners is there's going to be paralysis from over-analysis is what's going to happen. It's just beginners don't need to be worrying about the time method or drop sets and dynamic effort and stuff, because they're not going to be good enough at these lifts for them not to do anything. Can drop sets and dynamic effort be effective? Certainly. I use drop sets myself. I previously used dynamic effort methods, but again, this is a guide for beginners and not really up to snuff. Talking about bands in the next section, he just kind of regurgitates things that Lou Simmons says. Nothing special, nothing's really incorrect that I can see, but personally I think for unequipped lifters, I think bands are overrated. I'm not saying they shouldn't be used and they can certainly be a tool, but training with bands all the damn time, again, especially as a beginner, is not going to really do much for you. So kind of a weird thing here is he's saying you should basically only use lifting straps when doing heavy shrugs and power exercises and during Romanian deadlifts. Saying other than that, I see no purpose for using them, but from someone who's watched this channel for a while now, I see him using straps on a lot of shit. So that's a little weird. Don't really disagree with what he's saying here, but it just kind of contradicts what he does. But again, he's not necessarily running this program, so yeah. He's basically recommending that people don't use belts. Now he's saying that they're often used to mask the fact that 99% of people do not train their lower back and abs. It's partially true, but this is the age-old. If you can't lift without a belt, you can't lift it. But you know, there have been studies showing that you get better abdominal activation by using a belt. So potentially you get stronger abs if you do use a belt as opposed to not using one. Basically says, personally, he literally says, personally I don't use one and never have, but again, this kind of contradicts what he does in his own training. I see him wearing a belt a lot. So he's saying his core is so strong because he doesn't use belts, but like I just said, that's not really true. I do think people should train their abs directly and their lower back as well, because not training your abs works to a point. Like doing deadlifts and squats train that enough to a point, but eventually it's not going to be enough, and you need to do some kind of direct training, whether that be ab rollouts, planks, whatever it happens to be. Yeah. The next part is about neck training and stretching the neck. The training itself is not really anything too bad, but most of the stuff requires at least some gym equipment. So you're really gonna have to go to the gym 4 days a week then with this. So a lot of time in the gym. The next thing is a lot of exercise demonstrations. Right here I'm looking at trap stuff, and some of these he's really demonstrating incorrectly. He's showing a high pull / power upright row, and the technique on it is not what I'd like to see from someone. His elbows are coming way back instead of being internally rotated for like a snatch grip high pull. Not a very good demonstration. He's also showing a power clean and power snatch, and just from the photos, his setup is quite off. Initial position, the catch position. He's, at least at this time, this is several years ago these pictures are taken, you can tell, but he's lacking thoracic mobility to be in a good overhead lockout position, interestingly. But beginners should not be doing power cleans or power snatches, in my opinion, without some kind of coaching. I just think it's weird in some of these pictures, like the rack pull and block pull, his showing the top of the lift, he's actually hyperextending his lumbar spine. And he's showing pretty bad technique, actually. Not a good thing for beginners to be seeing, because a lot of people already do that when they're deadlifting. When they come to lockout, they hyperextend their lumbar and kind of lean back, which is a bad habit. So yeah, just some more of these photos. He's doing a circus press, just kind of like a one-arm push press. Foot position's bad. Again, he's hyperextending because he's lacking thoracic mobility and probably ab strength, I'd assume too. Looking at these pictures. So demonstration's not the best for beginners to be seeing. And I'm sure, like I said, these pictures from several years ago, and he's probably improved his mobility, I hope, but these need to be changed. He recommends Zercher squats as the #1 squatting choice, and as not the first thing I teach a beginner. Is it useful? Is it a good squat? Certainly. It can really be good at teaching people how to grind out a squat. It can be good for increasing quote-unquote core strength, but it's not something beginners should be doing. Putting that much weight in your elbow crease, for the way it's described as putting an elbow crease, that's not really the way you should really hold a Zercher. There's some nuance to holding the Zercher, and it's just not a good way to teach the squat. Like I said, I have a hierarchy I usually teach, which is goblet squats, then go into front squats, and then into back squats. But Zerchers should not be the go-to squat for people. They're great. I love Zerchers. I do them myself. I do have had clients do them, but they're not the #1 go-to squat. That's irresponsible, really, in my opinion. He does recommend people use the conventional deadlift, so that's good. Also recommends sumo, so cool. That's good. It's one of the first movements I teach people to usually. I think it's very important that people get good at conventional deadlifts. The next section is all about grip. Pretty sound, simple stuff, wrist curls, plate pinches, etc. Nothing really groundbreaking or out of the norm with this stuff, so it's fine. He does kind of talk a lot about what arm wrestlers do to train, which is a little bit sport specific for a general beginner to be doing, like weird lateral push downs and stuff, but not bad exercises by any means. It's just kind of weird inclusion in my opinion, but whatever. He goes on to kind of at the end here, it looks like we're getting to give some sample programs or samples how you should set up this program. and just so much randomness and exercises that beginners don't need to be doing. None of them are bad exercises per se. It's just like beginner doesn't need to be doing a Z press right off the bat. That's not something a beginner should be doing. It's very strangely set up. How it's just so much randomness. It's basically like fuck arounditis. And many people probably say that I have extreme fuck arounditis, which is partially true. I try new things, but again, I'm not a beginner. And yeah, so much randomness. A lot of banded work. In different shrugs. It's kind of like just randomly puts the exercise we went over in the previous section together in a random order. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, I'm not going to go into super detail with that just because I don't want. This is a paid-for program, but yeah, that's my opinion of the ways you set these up. And at the end, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 references. Yeah, they're just kind of things he mentioned previously in the thing. He didn't actually directly reference one thing. He did reference these authors in some of the books, but not really the proper way to reference things. But anyway, he does make a few references at the end, so that's good. To Louis Simmons, to super training, to and a few other things, but yeah. So a few nitpicky things. The writing style is a bit difficult to follow along with. It's just kind of it's kind of like what an 18-year-old would write. Not to like hamp on his style. It's kind of the way he talks, which is fine when you're talking. It's just it makes it a little difficult to read sometimes. It's fairly straightforward. For a few topics, he did kind of go on tangents a little bit, but for the most part, stay on topic, which is good. A lot of it's kind of like my way or the highway, which I'm never a fan of. It's kind of the same with starting strength, where this is the way to get strong. This is it. Nothing else is it. And I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff, but I mean, most programs, if you're selling something, that's often probably a smart thing to do if you're trying to make money. Not a whole lot of science behind any of it. There's like references to science and like nods and winks towards science, but nothing's ever all that concrete. And he mostly just makes reference to his years of experience and how he's kind of tried everything. Yeah. So I guess that's my take. So part of the reason I want to make this is, again, it's going to create a lot of drama, but people have been linking me articles on my YouTube and elsewhere for quite a while now that are kind of, I guess, exposing unfortunate things, not just about this program, but yeah. And it really upset me, and I'd never actually gone through the full program. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I wanted to see the whole thing, and in my professional opinion, it's not a good program. Is it the worst thing in the world? No. I wouldn't necessarily say it's not a good program. This isn't something beginners should be running. Wouldn't work well for really anyone to get some noob gains right off the bat with it, but pretty much everything will give you noob gains. But it's not going to do a good job of building a base. It's not going to do necessarily a good job of putting on muscle. Again, it's obviously a bodybuilding style of book for a certain aesthetic they're reaching for, at least, but there's so many things here that beginners should not be focused on. Just like getting big traps right off the bat should not be your focus. Building a base should be, because that'll allow you in the future to have continued success. And so I'm just a little bit disheartened recently with some things I've been shown, and a little angry, which is part of why I made this. So I know it's gonna get a lot of hate. I Like I said at the beginning, this will probably be channel suicide for me, but some things need to be said, I guess, because, yeah, they do. More to come. For all my fans out there, I love you all. We'll see ya. Bye. So I realized after filming the rest of it that I had the old copy of Naturally Enhanced, so most of that pertains to the old copy. I have since obtained the newer version, so I'm just going to add some amendments here to things I found in the new one. Most of it seems to be pretty much the same, just with some added material, so the following stuff will be things that have been added or whatever. So I will say right off the bat, he does a little bit better job of explaining things. For the concurrent model, which is what this is based off of, he gives some examples, how to improve your rack pull if that's your goal, for example, what you should be doing week to week, and whatnot. So that's good. He's added some better examples, because like one of my big problems with the previous one is that there wasn't a whole lot of example work, and beginners, they're going to need examples because they're not going to know what the fuck they're doing. So yeah, that's good. So from what I can tell so far, the program is pretty much exactly the same. The intensity day still has 10 exercises, volume day still has 13, same order, same everything. So pretty much everything I said in the previous, when I filmed yesterday, it's still true. I will say some of the grammar issues have been fixed, not all of them, but the writing has been cleaned up a little bit, so that's good. The newer version still, it's very like spoken word almost, so it's a little difficult to read and kind of rambles a bit, but it's definitely a little better written. So with band work now, he's given some examples of how much band tension you should be using. Basically ripped from Louis Simmons again, but for the most part, what I can see, it looks pretty normal. Seems to be just the numbers that Louis Simmons gives out usually. The band tension might be a little higher, not exactly sure, but it looks like the band tension might be a little higher, but yeah. It's kind of taken from Louis Simmons, talks about dynamic effort even, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with incorporating other people's ideas, but that's good that he's giving at least some examples of what band tension to use now. He's talking about progressive range of motion. He kind of confuses Paul Anderson and Bob Peebles a bit here with their stories, but yeah. The problem with a lot of people using progressive range of motion, which has become an epidemic with the rack pulls and stuff, is that people never actually progress their range of motion. So that's not his fault by any means, because he does describe it as going all the way to the full range of motion, but yeah, that's just a problem with many fans, I guess, not really the program itself. Talking about nucleus overload training, makes reference to studies and such, doesn't actually link to them, which is a bit of a problem, but it's kind of a thing with this, not a whole lot of references being made. So here's where more of his recent stuff is coming in now, talking about weighted stretching, which is basically just like rack pulls and stuff, which is kind of what got him famous, so I guess YouTube famous, to understand why he's put a whole section about it in, but I think the rack pull debate has been finished now. Several people have commented on that already and why people should really stop doing 1-inch rack pulls and ruining barbells and stuff. But yeah, it's just a lot of bro science with this part. Yeah, but I don't want to talk about rack pulls all day. Another reference to a study, no source. Might be at the end, but there's no sourcing in the actual text, which is a problem. So kind of a weird thing here, talking about cheat reps, which most of it I agree with. I think cheat reps can be very useful for, rows and such, but it kind of brings up how the reason they're so good is because you overload the eccentric and get a stretch, but previously he was talking about how the eccentric doesn't really matter, and you just go real fast, so that's kind of contradictory a little bit. But yeah, it's talking a little bit more overload, but it's just kind of weird how earlier the eccentric didn't matter at all, and now suddenly it's important to overload it with cheat reps, so I don't know. Yeah. Also, again, guarantees you'll stay injury free if you're doing cheat reps and not strict stuff, which is a bad guarantee to be giving people. Makes people overconfident when they're cheating, especially beginners. In my opinion, should not be doing cheat rows and stuff. little bit of body English is fine, but for the most part, beginners, in my opinion, should learn how to control their muscles a little bit, be doing things strict, and it'll probably make them more injury resistant than doing cheat reps. So here he goes back on what he said in the original version, where he said never use straps, but he kind of corrects himself and says that using straps is a good idea and that they're actually a fundamental piece for the program. So that's good that he realized a mistake, changed it. But yeah, that's good. That's really good. Still says he's not a fan of belts though, and claims he never uses them really. So far, some of the neck exercises have updated pictures, which is good. They seem to demonstrate what you should be doing a little better. That's good. The original version, the pictures are a little iffy in that section, so that's good. A lot of these pictures, his technique has improved, but some of them still, like the barbell upright row, still being done incorrectly. Hyperextending his lumbar a bunch, elbows in the wrong position, etc. Again, a whole section on rack pulls, different kinds, Zercher on the back, etc. I will say this has a lot more exercises, which isn't a bad thing. It's not really a good thing either, because again, as I talked about earlier, paralysis from overanalysis. A lot of beginners will see these exercises and try to do all of them and then, suck at everything, because they won't ever get good at anything. Basically, they're never practicing anything enough. Rack pulls, again, way overrated in my opinion. Are they useful sometimes? Yes. I'm talking about above the knee rack pulls. Below the knee, even at the knee, can be very useful, but above the knee stuff is just, it's honestly not going to do a whole lot. Best case scenario, you're just wrecking the barbell. Newbies, 130 pound noobs do not need to be picking up 800 pounds 1 inch. That's not going to do anything other than make them sore probably and tear some ligaments and shit. There's definitely a greater incorporation of odd lifts in this version, but it's honestly, it's just more or less just like pictures and a collection of odd lifts. I'm not saying it says everything's so great, but it doesn't really say why or why they're beneficial. To some extent it does for some of the lifts, but a lot of them is just, Zerchers are awesome, trust me. There's a greater incorporation of abdominal exercises, which I appreciate. It's a good thing. A lot of people tend to neglect their abdominal muscles. A lot of beginners kind of fall into the fallacy that squats and deadlifts are enough, and they are to a point, but eventually they won't be enough, which I think I said earlier. So it's good that he's incorporated those. Again, a greater inclusion of grip exercises as well. A lot of them are inspired by what arm wrestlers do still, which I think is a little weird, just because, as far as I know, he's never arm wrestled, and they're very sport specific movements. I'm not saying they're bad movements by any means. I've even been doing a arm wrestler curl variation recently, but it's for fun. But it's a little weird, I think, to have beginners doing very sport specific training for a sport that they're probably not going to do. But not a bad thing necessarily, just kind of interesting, I guess. So a good thing here, kind of at the end of all these exercises I've been listing, he made a list of 20 of what he feels are the most important exercises. So that's good, because I think there's quite a hell of an overload of information with the previous section, just so many exercises listed. So that's good that he made what he feels are the most important. It's kind of a weird thing here. He has a strength chart of numbers he thinks are either weak, decent, strong, very strong, or naturally enhanced. And the weird thing is, it doesn't seem like he can hit most of these naturally enhanced numbers. For deadlift, he has 700, 800 pounds, and we know he's not capable of 600. So it's a little strange, but maybe it's good for him. It's good motivation that he thinks that he's not at his peak yet, which is good. Just a little bit strange, I guess. So an inclusion here near the end is an upper lower template. So you're splitting your upper and lower bodies into separate days for both the volume and intensity days, which I think is good. I'd say it's definitely superior to the original, but there's still a lot of exercises, especially for the upper body, but it is certainly better. Still a lot of, for the volume upper day, there's still 11 exercises, which is a lot, but definitely better. He says he doesn't use it, or he does use the upper lower, sorry. But yeah. He also makes the claim that it's the definitive powerlifting edition of the Natural Enhanced program, which I do not see this being very effective for powerlifters whatsoever. Good thing here at the end too, he's giving more examples of ways to set up the program, so that's good. Again, this is definitely aimed at beginners, and many beginners need a little bit of hand holding. I don't think they should have everything done for them, but a little bit of hand holding is good to get them started, so I'm glad he included that, but a lot of exercises.